welcome everyone to the sixth episode of our writer's journey. So our guest for today is Gretchen Felker Martin, right there on the screen. She is a best-selling horror author and film critic. Both her books, Manhunt and Cuckoo, have been bestsellers and critically acclaimed. Manhunt was named the #1 book of 2022 by Vulture and was one of the best horror novels of 2022 by Esquire Library Journal and Paste. Her second novel, Cuckoo, debuted this year on the USA Today's bestseller list. It is an honor to have you with us. How are you?
Oh, I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we are the first Indian writing crew who is interacting with you, so it's going to be super exciting. We have a lot of areas to cover in the horror genre, and it'll be exciting to talk to you about it. So,
Yeah, I can't wait.
All right. So in today's session, we will discuss not just the genre, but your journey as a writer through 5 different phases, which is ideation, first draft, editing, publishing, and moving on to the next project. And so the first thing that comes to my mind while discussing horror is kind of like how it affected me as a child while watching or while reading horror books or while watching horror movies and series like Evil Dead, Exorcist, etc. And there was one horror series in our local channel called the Z Horror Show. I don't know if most of our audience remember that. It used to be like scary, but there was this strange pull. I used to like still, despite being terrified, I used to still go back to it. I want to know why do you think we get this strange comfort from reading or listening to these kind of tales in horror?
Well, I think that life is frightening and overwhelming, and not much of it is in our control. But if we choose to go to horror, we can interact with that fear on our own terms.
So, across horror over the years, have you seen any sort of like evolution as such in the horror genre?
Absolutely. Horror is much more diverse in America now. When I was growing up, there were really only a very few authors of color working in horror. And they didn't receive a lot of attention. And now you have dozens and more coming into the field every year. And I think we still have a long, long way to go, but it's wonderful to see stories that come from perspectives that are not the same ones we've all been reading for 100 years.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, previously it used to be more about horror was written more for the sake of just providing the thrill that comes from it. But now we see the narrative kind of expanding to cover a lot of social elements, particularly the books that you have written. And given the heightened horror of the world that we are living in today, have you found this genre a more convincing space to depict reality as a writer compared to other genres?
Yeah, I have. I think that when I have tried to work in other genres, it has been a struggle. I think things kind of turn into horror when I work on them, because that's been a lot of my experience of the world.
All right. And is there any influence that you have gotten from other horror books or horror authors from outside America or from the eastern side of the world?
I was a huge fan of Audition as a kid. The novel, the Takashi Miike movie from 1999 is based on. I think Murakami is the author's name, not Haruki Murakami, another one. And I've been a huge fan of Japanese and Korean horror movies for my entire life. I grew up on the original Ring and The Grudge. And I love the horror that's been coming out of Indonesia and Southeast Asia for especially the past 10 years. I just saw Impetagore, which I think is forgive me. I think it's set in Thailand. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Or The Medium.
Oh yeah,
Just
I love The Medium. Yes,
it's
it is
tremendous.
amazing.
I
Yeah.
don't know that anything has scared me that much in years.
And there was this other movie as well called The Incantation. I don't know if you've watched it, but yeah,
Oh my God.
that was an amazing one as well. Yeah,
Terrifying. Yeah. No, I
true.
think, especially in terms of sheer scariness,
Hmm.
Asia is where horror is at right now, especially for
Okay,
film.
all right. While referring to your Goodreads, I came across this question that was there, like, what were the books that had influenced you over the years, right? And there was a mention of The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. And as an Indian audience, we'd love to hear your thoughts about how that book has influenced you and your writing. And we would also like to know if you had exposure to any further Indian writing as well.
Not a ton. Um, but it was a big influence on me. You know, I read it as a teenager, and to see these really horrible life-defining experiences expressed so frankly was really freeing to me. I had never seen an author discuss things like sexual violence so openly. Um, and I had also never really seen, you know, at 11 years old, I had never seen anyone try to unpack colonialism.
Yep.
So there was a big moment for me in my reading career.
All right. That is awesome. That is awesome. Thank you for sharing that. We'd like to now move to the ideation section of your journey as a writer. Could you tell us about the journey that became the book Manhunt? You know, I'm curious to know what served as your starting point. You know, whether it was the kind of living experiences of transphobia, homophobia, from the perspective of trans women, or was it the theme of horror, which in this case was like apocalyptic body horror, and also which came first, really?
I think for me, it was the experience of transphobia that led me to picking post-apocalyptic horror to talk about it. Um, I came out in a pretty rough part of town, and when I was first out, I had bottles thrown at me. I had cigarettes flicked in my face. It was a very, very rough year. I had a neighbor who accused me of being a witch, which was Leonard. Oh, sorry, my cat is trying to get into my closet. Um, and at the same time, I was watching my country really lose its mind about trans people and indulging in all of this fear mongering and legislative assaults on our ability to live normal lives. And I had all this frustration and sadness, and I really needed to put it somewhere. And so I started to put together all the influences that I had already accrued as a reader, things like James Tiptree's The Screwfly Solution, or Torrey Peters' Infect Your Friends and Loved Ones, Cormac McCarthy's The Road. And I decided I wanted to do something in that genre, in that space, that was uniquely focused on trans people.
I think this is a very global kind of issue that not many people kind of bring out very explicitly in their books. And the way you have merged horror with these topics kind of amplified the message. And that was like really brilliantly done. So thank you for writing
Thank
those
you.
books. Thank you. Um,
Thank you very
uh,
much.
and I want to understand, like, for these ideas and while working on these ideas, what are the sources or like, for your material besides the experience and the news that surrounds you?
My sources, my biggest sources, I'm an avid reader of history. I love film. I watch everything I can make time for. I try to read as widely as I can. I think that the more disparate influences you can bring to something, the richer and more fleshed out it will be. Um, I'm also a real art lover. I try to make time for museums as much as I can. Whenever I find an artist whose work I love, I try to find an art book so that I can have that visual inspiration on hand. Um, I find that it's very important to nourish yourself in that way as a writer, to constantly have new influences.
And so when you are jotting down all this information, like you're collecting all this info dump to work on your novels, how do you navigate through it? Or you know that, okay, I'm going to use this much from all these materials, or maybe this piece of art that had inspired me. You'll be using that. So how do you balance it out? Is there some sort of like exercise that you do at this stage?
There's nothing formal. I don't know if you guys have this quote in India, but there's a famous court case in America where Chief Justice Potter Stewart was asked to define hardcore pornography. And he said, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. So, I go by the rule of thumb.
All right.
I follow my gut.
All right. Awesome. Okay. So now that the idea has been set and you are about to start with the first draft, okay. So I would like to know, like, when you approach a character or a character sketch, how do you work with it? Like, is there some sort of like a table you fill with like character definitions? What are the preferences, etc.? Or you just go without that plan?
I usually go without a plan. Often I will use someone I know or someone I've seen in public as a jumping off point, and I will run from there. And I find that characters tend to kind of put themselves together if you start that way, because you'll have this whole palette to draw on: what art they love, how they dress, what foods they prefer, how they tend to speak to each other, and what their views on the world are. It all comes together pretty naturally. I'm not a big list maker.
So you're not a plotter sort of a writer, right? You're more of a pantser.
No.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So when you're moving ahead with your first draft and you realize, like, there is a lot of things that probably got missed out, and like, when you do this reverse engineering of, again, working on the story, like, what is the process like? Do you make notes on a particular board or something of that sort?
As I go, I will make notes in a separate document, and I'll leave myself page numbers and line numbers, and I'll say, you need to include this piece of motivation here on your second pass, or you need to move this part to this part of the novel. And I find that as long as I keep moving, it all gets done pretty quickly, and the revisions become a pretty seamless part of the first draft process.
All right. And talking about the backdrop or the geographic locations that you use, particularly in Manhunt, because we are covering a lot of geographic areas, right? Like, it's a whole world in the post-apocalyptic scenario. When I read them, none of them felt like similar to each other. Obviously, you had to describe where you are, because the characters are always constantly on the move. Where do you draw the inspiration for defining the places?
So most of the places in Manhunt are places that I grew up in or around. I was born in New Hampshire. I'm actually there right now visiting my family, and I was in and out of Massachusetts my whole childhood. So I've been to most of the buildings that appear in the Boston scenes in Manhunt. I've been to the Seabrook nuclear power plant, and I've been to the fort. And that's the imagery that I know and love best: the woods of New Hampshire and the coast. Those are things that are important to me, and that made it easy to immerse myself. So I didn't really take any notes. I would just decide at the top of each chapter where they were going to be and what they were going to be doing.
All right, all right. And during the first draft stage, or at any point of time while you're writing, what's your writing schedule like, or your environment like?
Go ahead.
No, because the question why I'm asking this is most of the writers in our community kind of split their time between their regular day jobs and while writing, and sometimes it becomes very hard to focus. So that's the reason why I'm asking this, is like, what makes you focus while writing, or what are the different strategies you use?
Yeah, no, I did split my time between writing and day jobs for almost 8 years. And sometimes it is just grueling to come home from a day of especially if you're writing for work too. Like I was doing technical writing, and then you have to come home and be creative, and it's draining. It really sucks the soul out of you. What works for me, a little music, making sure I stay hydrated. Sometimes I will watch a movie first to set the tone. I try to do at least 500 words every day. I usually do more. I seldom do fewer. My philosophy there is that even if you just get a few hundred words done every day, at the end of the year, you're still going to have a book. And if you don't get a few hundred words done every day, you won't.
That's very true. Absolutely. Now, I'd like to talk about like constructing action-based scene. All right, in Manhunt there has been a lot of it, and it's been like on a big canvas where there are like hordes of flesh-eating men, and there were the primary characters as well, like fighting for survival. So when you construct an action scene, and to keep the reader hooked and know exactly where your characters are, where to bring their attention to, what's your process for going through it? How do you construct those scenes?
So what I try to think about is blocking, which I have encountered on stage and in comics and in seeing how films are made. If you develop a basic knowledge of blocking, the rest starts to click into place. Where is this character? Where are they in relation to this other character, to this landmark? How much time does it take to get between them? And I think that aside from that, the most crucial element to me is to make the reader feel as much as possible that they are in the character's skin. You want to push them into the experience. If the character is hunted, you want the reader to feel hunted. If the character is vanquishing an enemy, you want them to feel triumphant when they read it. There's a rhythm to all of that. I find that watching action and suspense movies will teach you what that rhythm is, because you can feel it when it's good and when it's right. And you can mimic that in prose. It's not that hard.
All right, all right. So there were a very interesting use of references and metaphors in your books. And some of my favorite references, I think I pinged you last night about Kubrick's monoliths in the eyes of goats, as well as mention of Star Wars, or other pop culture references. So do you use that consciously, or should one use such references which are only very relevant to the particular context of the story?
I'm not a purist about that. I think that a character should have some kind of relationship to film, to print, to music. And that is part of what tells you who these fictional people are. Something I suggest that people look at very often is The Sopranos. Tony spends the whole series quoting movies that he grew up watching.
Yeah, true that.
Yeah. And it gives you a real feeling for the world that he grew up in. And it's very different from the world that older characters grew up in, and they'll often reference older film.
So
So to
yeah,
me, it's part of reflecting, when did these characters grow up? What are their interests?
okay. So more like referencing the time.
Right.
Okay, all right, awesome. So how, like, in both the books, Manhunt and obviously in the Cuckoo, you have used like a lot of POVs. While working with multiple POVs, do you have any tips and tricks that you would like to share to writers who want to work with multi POVs in their books?
Yeah. Don't write 7 point of view characters.
We are all
um,
tempted to sometimes.
it's a big headache, and frankly, I think I could have done just as well with 5. Um, I like to switch back and forth. I find it stimulating and interesting. Not everyone shares that opinion. For some people, it's distracting. And I pushed myself for my next novel. It's all one perspective. So we'll see how people react to that. I found it very interesting to stay in one voice. I think that when you're writing multiple points of view, you have a really powerful editorial tool, which is the ability to skip away from things and imply them and then come back at them from a different angle, or move to a scene that rhymes thematically or in terms of content. And there's just so much flexibility in it.
Yes, absolutely. The kind of canvas kind of like grows, but how much you can cover, not just in terms of area, but also like, because I noticed in Manhunt, different aspect of a particular character you have introduced through the POV of others. Like if Beth noticed one particular trait of Fran, then the other character introduced another aspect of Fran. That was like beautifully done, and
Thank you.
yeah. So I just love that. So while you're doing this, in like introducing a particular trait of a just let's consider like individual one, and you're planning to introduce a number of characteristics about them. Do you, since you mentioned that you're a pantster, so how do you approach as a pantster? Which trait of a character will you be introducing at a particular section?
To me, it's always about what makes the strongest first impression. It's
Uh,
about what the plot needs. You have to sort of follow the dramatic rhythm of it. It might not be vital in the first chapter to know that Beth is kind of a romantic, but it is very important to know that she has a complicated relationship with Fran, and that she has, sort of damaged self-confidence, because that's going to set the tone for a lot of what happens next. So it's
okay.
sort of, for me, it's always about sort of a declining scale of importance. You start with the big, broad stuff, and then you work in the little details. It's like meeting a new person. At first, they're kind of 1 or 2 traits to you, and then slowly you begin to see the entirety. Sometimes I'll skip ahead and I'll write something and I'll see if it feels right and if I can force it in somewhere. And sometimes I'll just sort of run wild and see where I go.
Right.
Usually I'm able to find a home for most things that I write. Some inevitably winds up getting cut.
There's this other aspect while you are in the editing or the first draft stage, which is the writer's block. And how do you get past that in general?
I do not believe in writer's block.
Okay.
When I don't want to write, I sit down and I write. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not good. But at the end of it, I've written something. And it honestly, it doesn't even matter if I've written, Beth went to the picnic table and sat down and ate 1 bite of potato salad and then a second bite of potato salad. And she thought, boy, I hate potato salad because of this time in my childhood that someone I can't stand made potato salad and I got sick from it. it doesn't matter how awful and bad and hackneyed it is. You just have to get it down until it starts feeling easy again, because it'll come and go for your whole career. And if you sit around waiting to be inspired or for everything to feel right, you're never going to get anything done.
Yes, that's very true. I mean, among us writers, we try to like push each other. Like some people sometimes, like one of our members would say that, oh, okay, I don't know what to write next. So we just pull them into a call, and then we discuss. Okay, tell us about your story. What's going next? And then we kind of like brainstorm and try to push our members. So yeah, that kind of works for us as well. But yeah. So yeah, that was about writer's block. I'd like to move to the section of publishing. In the horror genre, like, what are the challenges that you've faced in the world of publishing?
I have been extraordinarily lucky in my experiences with mainstream publishing. Sometimes I'm asked to cut things that I think are important, and usually if I push back and say no, I'm allowed to keep them. Every once in a while, I do have to kiss something goodbye, and that's okay. But my agent found me. My publisher bought my first manuscript on spec. So it's been about as smooth as it can go, which is not at all what I was expecting. I never expected to be conventionally published. I sort of stumbled into it.
So how did the discovery happen? Like you mentioned that your agent found you. So was it through some pitch contest or some literary fest or etc.?
No, it was actually on Twitter. I had posted the first chapter of Manhunt, just to get it out there. And my agent, Connor Goldsmith, saw it and got in touch with me.
Wow, that is a strategy I could never imagine. Well, because many writers are kind of afraid that if they put their work out in the public, it might get plagiarized by someone or something. Someone might steal the idea or something. But in your case, did you just put it up on Twitter and you probably tagged someone, or it just worked its way out?
It just worked out.
Wow, you've been very lucky.
I am. I would say one thing that I had going for me, I had a feeling that it was a good idea, the story. And so I paid a friend of mine, Tom Horstman, an artist, to draw something for it. And they drew a beautiful illustration. And I'm sure that played into how much attention it got.
The cover image of Manhunt was really eye-catching. That was like really great. I was like, okay, let me just see what the book is about. And like, okay, that's how I found you. But so yeah, that's worked out great. But before we proceed with the other questions, I would like to remind the audience that if you have any questions for the author, we'll soon be reaching to our Q&A section. You can put your questions on the chat, and we will start asking them. Okay. Now, the next thing to you, Gretchen, is about your readers, right? If I'm not wrong, there has been a very divided reaction to the book, right? And has it influenced, your approach to the next book, or do you just show the middle finger and say, like, I don't care?
Yeah, I don't think about it. To quote Hayao Miyazaki, I don't think about my audience.
That's amazing.
I don't think you can do good work if you do. I'm writing something that I want to create. I'm not writing something to please other people.
All right.
I'm not particularly interested in pleasing anyone.
Okay. All right. So that makes sense, because we occasionally come across these questions in our chat groups that, okay, I'm writing this a story based on this theme, or kind of like this issue. I'm not sure if it will be received well. People will be very critical, because there are a lot of other social issues that are in India and related to caste, etc. There have been many books, several have been banned or something. But I guess you're right. I mean, as a writer, you should really not worry about how people are going to react to it, and rather just push on. That's really powerful. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And yeah, another thing that I wanted to ask, you've already mentioned that you've been lucky with your publishing agent. What about the marketing strategy after the book is out into the market? Like, do you kind of let the publisher decide the marketing strategy, or you as an author also focus on marketing strategies?
So as an author in the modern world of publishing, you do have to do a lot of your own marketing. Most of the events that I did for Manhunt, I set up. Most of the quotes that are on Manhunt's jacket are quotes that I solicited from other authors. I had to handle most of that myself. It was different with Cuckoo because I had already proven that I could, you know, help a book succeed. And so they put some support behind me, which to me seems a little bit backwards, but um, in general, I try to let it take its course. You know, I'm not a market analyst. I'm not a saleswoman. My job is writing, so I'm
Yeah.
working on new stuff.
Yeah, but what we occasionally hear is that, like, most publishers, we've heard like several executive publisher in different panels discuss about what they look for in an author. Many do mention that the top honchos usually go for, okay, what's the social image of the author? Like, how many followers do they have, or like, what sort of influence they have? Like, yeah, like, have you faced any sort of like issue with that process?
Yeah, no, it's been a headache. As you said, people have been very divided about the book, and people have also been very divided on me. um, I am opinionated. I'm not quiet. Um, there was a quite a big problem when um, the genocide in Palestine began. And I don't see how anyone could stay quiet about that.
Mm.
Um, but I think if you worry too much about this stuff, you're going to wind up backing yourself into a corner where all you do is smile and nod and say things that you know will keep people comfortable, and that's really not what I'm interested in as a person. So I try to let that drive before I do marketing concerns. You know, if the book sells, it sells, and if it doesn't, it doesn't.
And have you ever thought about reaching out to book influencers? Like many authors, I forgot the name of that particular author. She went viral. So, what is your thought on book influencers in general? Have you been approached?
I've been approached by many of them. And my line is always that if you would like to talk about my book to your followers, that's totally fine. I'm not going to pay you.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
not
a struggle
interested in
earning.
paid publicity. I think that it's a dead end, and you're really not paying for anything other than, you know, vanity and the illusion of popularity. um, but I'm very happy to work with people who are serious about their craft, who are dedicated to really substantive reviews of books and film. Um, and I have worked with some really lovely influencers. Um, no names are coming to mind at the moment. It's
Okay.
You can imagine when you're trying to make a book succeed, you talk to a lot of people.
Yep. Awesome. So the next thing that I would like to talk about is, once you've finished your book, the publishing is done, the book is out in the market, and now you want to move on to the next project, which out here happened to be Cuckoo. So how did you move from the world of Manhunt to Cuckoo? Was there some sort of like transition process behind that?
You know, I tried to jump right from Manhunt into Cuckoo, like
Okay.
immediately. Close one document, open the other. And I got some down, and then I realized that I badly needed to take a week off. So my advice is rest a little bit, not too long, and then just jump right in. You know, it'll come naturally. you'll be so sick of everything you just wrote that it will very, very naturally and normally be different.
Understood.
Yeah, I don't find it to be a big challenge. And I think that if you don't overthink it, it won't be.
All right. And now at this stage that Lily Wachowski is adapting your work, Manhunt, how has the experience been? Like, I know it's too early to ask questions about that, but how did that really happen? Or again, was it like a very lucky sort of like pay based on
So
like, you
my
know? Uh-huh.
agent built that deal. And it shocked me that someone
Wow.
was buying it. It has been wonderful. It has been so cool to sit down and receive guidance and praise from someone who has been so influential to me and my life and my art, and from a trans woman who really defined the art of the generation before mine. Um, it's tremendously meaningful to me. It's a lifelong dream. I really couldn't ask for more.
All right, awesome. And one last question before we move to the Q&A is if there was any other genre, if given a chance that you could work on, what would that be apart from horror?
I think it would either be fantasy or spy fiction.
Nice. Nice. That's awesome. So, all right, we'll move on to the Q&A now. First question is Sachin, by Sachin. Sachin, would you like to mention how you proudly snagged an arc of Manhunt? Sachin, over to you. Would you like to ask the question yourself?
Hey, Gretchen. So nice to actually, be interacting with you today. And I'm a big fan of yours after Manhunt, of course. Well, Snag and Ayashi, I think
Thank you
I've
so
been
much.
so yeah. So I mean, the Snag and Ayashi that happened by chance. I happen to be a reviewer, and I've been reviewing fantasy and horror for a long time. And when it was released on NetGalley, I managed to put in a request, and they happened to agree for that. So I was probably one of the early guys who read Manhunt. I was blown away, and I'm looking forward to reading Cuckoo as well now for sure. Yeah,
Oh, I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much.
absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Sachin also had this question about the query process. He's asking, especially since Manhunt was radically different book when it was coming out, how difficult was it to sell it to an agent and then go on sub, etc.? What was the journey like?
Well, I didn't have to sell it. Someone came looking for it. I can't imagine that it would have been easy to sell.
You, that's you're the exception there for sure.
Yeah,
But
I'm
awesome.
incredibly lucky.
Yeah,
All right.
so glad for.
Thank you.
All right. Next question is, do you ever consider or worry about what might be too unsettling for the readers? And would that aspect ever influence you to tone it down? That's by MJ. Neela, right? Yeah, Neela's question. Yeah.
Thank you, Neela. No and no. If I want to write it, it's going in the book.
All right. Sukhjit asks, have you had any formal training on craft of writing?
Yes, actually. I had a year-long seminar in college with the mystery writer Bill Tapley, who really, really shaped how I approach it. He was very much a writing is a craft type of guy. He was a working man. I come from a blue-collar background, and it's really important to me to keep that alive in my work. So, I don't see myself as a fancy person or someone who is doing like an elevated, more special job. I'm building brick walls.
So, Sukhjit also asked, do you have any manuscript or ideas which you started and then got sidelined? If so, do you go back to those, or are or are there manuscripts that get started but are left and forgotten completely?
I tend not to start something if I'm not going to finish it. I'm sure there are a few ideas that have fallen through the cracks over the years, but not a significant number. I think that focus is pretty crucial for any kind of success in writing.
All right. So the next question is also by Sukhjit. He's asking, would there be what would some of these resources, what kind of recommendations would you give to learn the craft? Like any sort of resources or something like that, books?
I think it's really easy to buy a bunch of guides to writing, and really all that any writing guide is a list of things that worked for one person, and it might not all work for you. So it's good to keep that in mind. There's no real wrong way to do it as long as you're sitting down and writing. The most important part is just to read broadly. Read a lot. Read stuff that challenges you. I would also strongly recommend reading poetry because its rules are different and it will make you more conscious of the rules of prose.
That would make our home poets very happy. Neela is one of them, because usually it's a very polarized kind of world, right? Where poetry, not many people find the importance in poetry while they're trying to like hone their craft. It might be just like fiction writing or non-fiction writing, but poetry's got this rhythm, cadence, and there's a lot to learn from it. And I absolutely agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So are there any poets that you would like to mention that has influenced your writing so far?
Oh, sure. Wilfred Owen, Ted Hughes, Sylvia Plath. I'm a really big, I know this is trite, but I'm a really big fan of Shakespeare's poetry. I think everyone should read Shakespeare. I think everyone should read as much poetry as they can get their hands on. I'm a big fan of Wallace Stevens and Theodore Roethke, Rilke. Like you said, poetry is not in vogue right now. It's not popular. It's not an influential field. But what it is the essential boiled down elements of humans trying to communicate things like dreams and beliefs to each other. You're boiling language down until it's more than itself. And there's just nothing more important for a writer to understand. A writer's whole job is to look at something quotidian and everyday and boring and pull the divine out of it. And that's what poetry is.
So there's another question from Sachin. He's asking, are there any authors that you're currently reading?
Yes. I just read Tiffany Morris's Green Fuse Burning, which I really enjoyed. She is a Mi'kmaq indigenous author, and it's about a mixed race indigenous woman who goes on an artist's retreat sort of involuntarily and winds up really obsessively making these gorgeous paintings of the pond she's staying at. And I'm in the middle of Ian M. Banks' The Wasp Factory right now, which is a really famous piece of transgressive literature that I've never read before. And earlier this year, I read Tender as the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica, which I don't think there's any way you can claim it's not the greatest horror novel of the 2010s.
Well, thanks for sharing that list. I'm pretty sure like our audience would definitely check those works out and try to get influenced by them. One question I have when we're talking about like author influences, if there has been any author that has you wanted to see how they kind of like created a scene or created the work that they did, how do you dissect or study a particular work of fiction?
I think you look at the way that an author constructs sentences. You look at the way that they construct paragraphs, and it is really just about looking. There's no further way to break it down. You have to see it. You have to recognize the patterns. And once you recognize them, you can start to iterate on them for yourself. You can change them. You can repurpose them. You can make them your own. That's a slow process. There's a reason that most writers start out copying existing writers before you can kind of generate your own ideas. I think that close reading is really the only way. You have to sit down with the work and really devote yourself to it.
Now, the topic that I would like to bring up is your upcoming book. Could you tell us a bit more about that and give us some spoilers if that is allowed, exclusively for
Absolutely.
IKC? Yes, please go ahead.
Absolutely. So my next book will be coming out early next year, and it's called Black Flame. And it is about a very lonely, very repressed lesbian film restorer who works at this conservative film archive. And through a chain of strange events, she winds up restoring a print of a film that was believed to have been destroyed during the Holocaust. And it's a experimental queer film by a collective of Jewish performers. And she starts to lose her ability to distinguish between what on the camera is real and what's a special effect.
Wow. Wow. It's like that is super exciting. And when is that releasing? Next year?
Next year, hopefully by spring.
Okay, all right. Well, we hope that we see copies coming down to India so that we can definitely buy that book. And
yeah, I would love to get a translation. Here's hoping.
Yep. So I guess you've got your work translated to other languages as well, right?
German, French, and Turkish so far.
Yeah. And how has that journey been like? Like, do you reach out to translators, or is it like the translators reach out to you?
They've come to me, and it's been very nice so far. It's been really, really cool to see how people around the world react to the work.
That's awesome. And how do you make sure that the kind of essence that was in the English version of the book is captured in the same way in the other language if you're not aware of that language?
That is unfortunately something that I don't have an answer for. I hope that it endures, but ultimately I don't have the skills to make sure.
All right, awesome. So yeah, so we kind of are closing to the end of our session. Thank you, Gretchen, so much for your time. And if there are any final pieces of advice for the upcoming authors from like India that you would like to share to get their works completed, published, and not to lose hope, please do share it with us.
Write exactly what you want and don't stop until it's finished. That's it. That's the whole job.
All right. Thank you so much.
I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And is there any way the audience can get in touch with you if they would have any queries?
Absolutely. My email is open.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Gretchen. And before you leave, we would like to take a group snap. There you are. Okay, so everybody, if your cameras are on, and it's not a compulsion that you have to have your cameras on, but we can take a quick snap. All right, 1, 2, 3, here we go. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gretchen, once again for being with us, and best of luck for your novel, and have a wonderful day ahead.
My pleasure. Thank you guys so much for inviting me.
Yep. Bye.
Thank you so much.